The sky over the Llano Estacado was a slaughterhouse canvas, bleeding out in hues of raw iron and bruised purple. The sun, a dying ember, caught the high-winged circle of the crows as they spiraled over the smoke. They were patient. They knew the land. Below them, the mission wagons were skeletons of char and hope. Bibles lay swollen and blackened, their pages lifting in the hot wind like charred butterflies. The smell of scorched pine and something coppery, something human, choked the air. Elowen Hart was tied to the axle of the lead wagon, the one with the painted cross now split by an axe. She was 22 years old, and her life had ended twice in the last hour. Once when the bullets stopped, and again when the silence began. The rough hemp of the rope bit into her wrists, pulling them taut against the iron-banded wood. Her head throbbed, a dull counterpoint to the sharp agony in her chest. Dried blood, dark and flaking, matted her black hair to her temple. A single, spreading wet stain darkened the buckskin over her left arm, just below the shoulder. It was not blood. It was the first milk, the colostrum, her body's useless, aching promise to a child who was no longer there. She stared at the stain, her vision blurring. It was the only thing she could see. A thin, mewling cry cut through the wind. It was weak, a kitten sound, and it ripped Elowen from her stupor. "No, please, no," she whispered, the words cracking her lips. He stood over her, a tall man whose shadow blotted out the last of the dying sun. He wore a black frock coat, impossibly clean despite the massacre. A starched white collar dug into his jowls, and a silver timepiece chain was draped across his vest. He was Judge Abram Crowell, and he was a man of righteous, terrible purpose. He did not look at Elowen. He looked at the small, linen-wrapped bundle in the arms of the man beside him. "A soul to be saved," Crowell pronounced, his voice smooth and cold as a river stone. "Another lamb brought forth from the wilderness. It's pagan squalor. Judge," the other man, Mac Rooker, said. Rooker was all grime and animal muscle, a perfect counterpoint to Crowell's icy precision. He held the baby with a butcher's indifference. "Barely alive when we found him. The Lord provides, Mr. Rooker." Crowell said. He adjusted his cuff. "The Society for Orphan Relief and Re-Education has a charter. We are bound by law and divine providence to remove such children from influences that would damn them. He will be civilized. He will be washed in the Word." "He's my son!" The words tore from Elowen's throat, raw and broken. She lunged against the ropes, the axle groaning. "He's mine! You can't!" Crowell finally turned his gaze to her. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, empty of pity. "It is because he is yours, child, that we must. The Navajo blood must be diluted. The Irish temper must be tamed. We are saving him from you." He nodded once. Mac Rooker, with a grunt, turned to leave. The snap of Elowen's sanity was as loud in the sudden silence as a rifle shot. She threw herself forward, her body heaving against the restraints. The movement tore the cut on her head open anew. "I'd rather die," she screamed, a sound that startled the crows from their circle. She arched her back and spat. A gobbet of blood and saliva landed squarely on the toe of Abram Crowell's polished black boot. Rooker froze, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. Crowell simply looked down at the stain, a flicker of something almost like amusement in his cold eyes. He did not wipe it. He smiled. It was a reptile's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Death is a mercy you have not earned," he said softly. "You will live. You will live and know that your son is becoming a white, God-fearing man, far from your heathen hands. That will be your penance." He turned away. "Mr. Rooker, the bundle," with a callous laugh. Rooker tossed the linen-wrapped infant. It was a short, underhanded arc, a movement of pure contempt. Crowell caught it with one hand, as easily as if it were a sack of flour. He cradled the bundle against his chest and began walking toward his horse. his back to the woman he had just hollowed out. Rooker followed, mounting his own horse and spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Elowen's feet. A quarter-mile away, nestled in a jumble of sandstone boulders, Isaiah Fort rested the barrel of his Sharps rifle on a flat rock. He had seen it all. He was a ghost in this landscape, a former cavalry scout, a black man who knew how to disappear against the red earth. He had been tracking this group for 2 days, drawn by the smoke, smelling the wrongness of it. He had a clear shot. He could take Crowell clean off his horse. The range was 400 yards. Child's play for him. His finger tightened on the trigger, feeling the familiar 2-stage pull. 1 shot. And then what? His eyes scanned the scene. Crowell, Rooker, and 10 other riders, all heavily armed. A dozen men. He was one man. If he fired, Rooker would put a bullet in the woman's head before the echo of his shot returned. Or he would grab the baby and use it as a shield. Or he would simply drop it. Isaiah had seen men like Rooker. They were curs, and curs were unpredictable when cornered. He could not win. Not this way. A single bullet would be a death sentence for the mother and the child. His hand, steady as the rock beneath it, eased its pressure. He lowered the rifle. The hammer clicked back to the safety position, a sound lost in the rising wind. The wind had been a whisper, but now it began to howl. A curtain of grit and sand, red as the sunset, swept across the plain from the north. A sandstorm. The Llano's brutal blessing. Crowell's party mounted, their figures already blurring. They turned their horses south, toward the jagged cut in the earth known as Cedar Breaks, their heads bent against the sudden, scouring gale. They did not look back. They rode into the storm and were consumed by it, shadows dissolving into grit. The sound of the baby's cry, already faint, was snatched by the wind and thrown back into the growing darkness. Then it, too, was gone. Isaiah waited. He waited until the last thrum of the horse's hooves was swallowed by the storm. He would not go to the woman yet. He was a scout. His job was not to fight the storm, but to follow the tracks it left behind. He would follow them. He would follow them to the gates of hell if he had to. But first, the woman. Night fell, not with the gentle easing of the east, but like a stone, heavy and final. The temperature plummeted. The wind shrieked, a living thing tearing at the wagon, at her clothes, at her skin. The sand was in her mouth, her eyes, her open wounds. Elowen Hart was alone. She hung from the wheel, her arms numb, her body shaking with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The physical pain was a distant fire, a beacon far across a frozen sea. The center of her, the place where the baby had been, was a hollow, sucking void. She thought of the cry, his cry. She had known him for less than a day, and he was the only part of her that mattered. They had taken him. I'd rather die. She had meant it, but as the cold seeped into her bones, a different feeling began to dawn. It was slow, cold, and heavy. It settled in the void inside her, giving it weight. Grief was a fog. It clouded the mind. It softened the edges. It begged for the release of tears. This new thing was not grief. It was a stone. It was an icicle. It was the edge of a newly sharpened blade. They had left her to die. They thought her weak. They thought her a heathen woman, broken by the loss of her child. Crowell was wrong. She would not die. Death was an escape, and she would not escape. She would endure. She would live. She would live to find the man with the cold eyes and the silver watch. She would live to find the man who tossed her son like garbage. And she would live to find her son. Elowen Hart closed her eyes against the stinging sand. She did not feel the cold. She did not feel the ropes. She felt only the hatred, a pure, clean, perfect thing. It was the first solid thing she had held on to since the sun set. It was the knife that would keep her awake. It was the strength that would, when the time came, cut her free. The sandstorm had passed, leaving the world scoured and unnaturally still. The air was cold, thin, and tasted of dust. Elowen hung in the ropes, a marionette with cut strings, suspended somewhere between the living and the dead. The hatred that had kept her conscious had burned itself down to a dull, cold ember, buried beneath a mountain of shock and freezing cold. A sound, a scrape of a boot on sandstone. Her head snapped up, the movement sending a fresh, blinding spike of pain through her skull. She expected Rooker. She expected a bullet. A figure emerged from the pre-dawn gloom. Not tall like Crowell, not broad like Rooker. This man was built of wire and shadow, and he moved with a stillness that seemed part of the land itself. He was the black scout she had seen briefly with the wagon train days ago, the one who had disappeared before the attack. He said nothing. He knelt beside her, and the first thing she felt was the sharp, metallic smell of his knife. He did not saw at the ropes. He found the knot, and with a single, precise flick of his wrist, the hemp parted. Elowen collapsed onto the axle, her arms falling uselessly to her sides, blood rushing back into them with a pins and needles agony. The man, Isaiah Fort, stepped back, giving her space. He unslung a canteen and held it out. His voice was low, rough as the terrain. "Drink, slow." She fumbled for it, her hands refusing to grip. He sighed, a quiet sound of impatience, and knelt again. He lifted the canteen to her cracked lips. The water was warm, metallic, and tasted of life. It was the most profound relief she had ever known, and it hurt. Every swallow was a fresh agony in her raw throat. She drank, choked, and drank again, until he pulled the canteen gently away. Enough for now. He pressed something cold and hard into her hand. A wooden handle, a heavy blade, a Green River knife. "You'll need this." He turned and began scavenging the wreckage. Elowen watched, her mind a fog. As he moved with economical grace, he pulled a wool blanket from a smoldering crate, a small sack of parched corn from another. He was a man accustomed to ruin. He returned and stood over her. In the faint, gray light, she could see his eyes. They were old, tired, and held no pity, only purpose. "I saw them take the boy," he said. "No comfort, just fact." "My son," she whispered. The words were stones in her mouth. "Yes." He looked toward the south, where the tracks of Crowell's party were already being softened by the wind. "I'm going after them." A spark lit in the void of her chest. "I'm coming." She tried to stand, her legs, cramped and frozen, buckled instantly. She fell to her knees in the ash, a cry of pure frustration tearing from her. Isaiah looked down at her, his expression unchanged. "No, you are not. You are wounded. You are weak. You would be dead by noon. I would be dead for trying to carry you." "You can't," she pleaded, the old Elowen returning for a moment, the one who believed in help. "You can't leave me." "I am not leaving you," he said, cutting her off. "I am leaving you to live. You want the boy back." She nodded, her jaw tight. "Then you get strong. You heal. You learn to be harder than this land." He slung his rifle over his shoulder. "I will track them. I will find where they take him, and I will bring him back to you." He paused, a flicker of something, perhaps a memory, crossing his face. "I promise you, on my own soul, I will bring that boy home." And with that, he was gone. He did not walk into the sunrise. He simply melted back into the shadows of the rocks, moving south, as silent as the crows that had returned to circle overhead. Elowen was alone again, but she was not the same. She had water, she had a knife, and she had a promise. She looked at the knife. She looked at the blanket. She forced herself to her hands and knees. The first task, stand. She failed. She fell. She tried again. Using the wagon wheel for support, she pulled herself up, her body screaming, every muscle a wire of fire. She stood, swaying in the wind. and looked south. She could not follow Isaiah. Not yet, but she could not stay. This place was a grave. She forced herself to think. Where? Where was safety? The land was open, hostile. She remembered the scout's words. Get strong, heal. She remembered a place Isaiah had pointed out 2 nights before. A fold in the earth. Cheboleta Mesa, a place to hide. It was 5 miles. It might as well have been 1,000. She took the blanket, the canteen, and the small bag of corn. She took one last look at the charred wagon, the grave of her old life. Then she put her back to it and began to walk, one agonizing step at a time, toward the mesa. The next days were a fever dream, a blur of sun-scorched rock and freezing shadow. She found the rock overhang at Cheboleta Mesa, a shallow cave that offered shelter from the wind but not the cold. She was not just grieving, she was sick. Her body, unaware of its loss, continued its maternal duty. Her breasts swelled, becoming rock-hard and agonizingly tender. The milk came, a useless flood, staining her dress and her blanket. With it came the fever. She lay on the cold stone floor, shivering, her teeth chattering, her skin on fire. The pain was a living thing, a hot iron pressed to her chest. She cried out, a thin, weak sound that the wind stole. And then, at night, the wolves came. She heard them, their long, lonely howls echoing off the canyon walls. They were close. They smelled her. Or perhaps, she thought in her delirium, they smelled the milk. They smelled the new mother, the vulnerable prey. She bit down on her own lip, the coppery taste of her blood a sharp anchor in the fog of pain. She would not cry out again. She would not draw them closer. She gripped the Green River knife, its handle a solid, comforting weight. Let them come. Let them try. The fever broke on the 4th day. She woke to find the sun on her face, the shivering gone, replaced by a profound, hollow weakness. The acute pain in her chest had subsided to a dull, throbbing ache. She was alive, that was all. She sat up, her head swimming. She rationed the last of the parched corn. She drank the last of the water. She was alive, and she was starving. Isaiah had taught her nothing, yet she had learned. She had learned that promises were wind. He was gone. The boy was gone. She had only herself. She was wrapping her feet in strips torn from the blanket when he reappeared. He emerged from the rocks below, as silent as before. He carried a rabbit, already skinned. He dropped it, along with a full canteen, at her feet. "You are still here," he observed. "Good." Eloan stared, a torrent of relief and rage warring inside her. "Where did you go?" "Tracking," he said, already building a smokeless fire in a pit, a trick of the cavalry. "Then hunting." He handed her the canteen. "You have a fever. This is willow bark tea. Drink it." It was bitter, but it was warm. She drank. He cooked the rabbit, and they ate in silence. The meat gave her strength, but it was his presence that cleared her mind. "I found their trail," he said, wiping his knife on his pants. "They moved fast, but they are heavy, and they think they are safe. They are wrong." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the dried milk on her dress, the fever-bright eyes, the raw, bitten lip. "You need to bind yourself," he said, his voice flat, not unkind. "Tightly. The pain will lessen." He tore a long strip from the same blanket she had used for her feet. "It will stop the milk." She did as he said, the act of binding her own body another kind in a violation, another kind of survival. For 2 nights, they stayed at the mesa. Isaiah left and returned, a ghost. He taught her, in his clipped, blunt way. "This is how you clean a wound." He showed her on a cut on his own arm. "Boil the water. Use the last of the whiskey if you have it. If not, use salt. No salt, use clean ash. This is how you move." He pointed to the sky. You wait. You wait until Deneb is at its peak. He pointed to the bright star in the swan. Then you walk for 2 hours. Then you stop. You do not move at sunrise. You do not move at sunset. That is when the world is looking. You ration water by the night, a cup when Deneb rises, a cup when it sets. No more. You can live 3 weeks without food. You will live 3 days without water. As she listened, as she healed, her mind grew clearer. The fog of grief and pain receded, and the hatred returned. But it was different now. It was cold. It was focused. It was memory. She remembered the way Judge Crowell had adjusted his cuffs, the smell of him, faint but sharp, like pine resin and old paper. She remembered the sound his boots made on the gravel, a specific, wealthy sound, a squeak of new leather and a heavy heel. She would know that sound again. She would know it in the dark. On the 3rd morning, Isaiah packed. "I am leaving. They are moving north." "I am coming." She said it was not a request. He shook his head. "Not yet, but I found them." Them? The tracks. San Miguel Crossing. The steel wheels of the judge's carriage. Rooker was at the post station. Eloin's hand tightened on her knife. What did he say? He was bragging. Isaiah's lip curled in distaste. Bragging to the telegraph man. Said the Lord's work was hard, but they had rescued a blessed child from the savages. Said the child was a sign. Said they were taking him and others to a new school, Fort Marrow. Fort Marrow? Eloin repeated. The name was foreign, a poison on her tongue. Where is it? Deep in the Mogollon Rim, a place for re-education, a place to wash the blood clean, or so they say. Eloin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. A school. They were not just stealing him. They were erasing him. She turned. Her hand was shaking. She found a piece of charcoal from their fire. She went to the flat, smooth wall of the mesa, the stone that had sheltered her, and she wrote, in big block letters, Rowan, her son's name, the name she and her husband had chosen, the name she had whispered to him in the 1 hour she had held him. It was a vow. It was a prayer. It was a threat. She turned back to Isaiah. Rowan. His name is Rowan. Isaiah Fort looked at the name on the rock. He looked at the woman, no longer a victim, but a weapon being forged. He nodded once. Rowan, I will remember. He handed her a piece of jerky. Now, we part. I will follow them to Fort Marrow. I will learn the place. I will watch. I will find a way. And me, she demanded. You, he said, pointing northeast. You will go to the Sangre de Cristo foothills. There is a ranch there, near the creek, Ellison's ranch, run by a man named Wyatt Ellison. He owes me a debt. I am not a charity case. No, Isaiah agreed. You are not. You are a survivor, but you are not yet strong enough. You go there. You heal. You work. You get strong. You learn to shoot that rifle I am leaving you. He had propped his own spare rifle, a Winchester, against the rock. You wait for me there. When I have a plan, when I know how to get him out, I will come for you. Do you understand? Eloin Hart looked at the rifle. She looked at the name on the wall. She looked at the man who had kept his promise. I understand. She said. He gave her the last of his supplies jerky, a little more corn, a full canteen. Be safe, Isaiah Fort. God has no jurisdiction here, ma'am, he replied, touching the brim of his hat. You just be smart. He turned and walked away, south, toward the sun, a solitary figure on a mission. Eloin watched him go until he was a speck. Then she shouldered the rifle, checked the canteen, and turned northeast. The sun was rising. She did not move. She waited, as he had taught her, for the shadows to grow long. She would move by night. She would heal. She would get strong, and she would wait. But as she hid in the rocks, the name on the wall, Rowan, seemed to burn in the sunlight, a promise to the sky, the earth, and the gods of her fathers. They had stolen her son, but they had just created a monster. The journey to the Sangre de Cristo foothills took Elowen 11 nights. She moved as Isaiah had taught her, a shadow among shadows, drinking from cold creeks, eating jerky and stolen, raw corn from unattended fields. The rifle was a heavy, awkward weight, but she never let it go. It was her penance and her purpose. By the time she found the turnoff for Ellison's ranch, she was a wraith, thin as a willow switch, her clothes in tatters, the fever still a low ember behind her eyes. But she was no longer sick. Her body had hardened, the milk had dried, and the ache in her chest had become a cold, solid mass. The ranch was nestled in a shallow valley, a simple, sturdy-looking house of pine and river stone, with a wide porch and a large, well-kept barn. It was a place built to withstand the wind. A man was on the porch, sighting down a rifle barrel he was cleaning. He looked up when her shadow crossed the yard, and the rifle was level and aimed at her heart before she had taken 2 more steps. He did not move, did not speak. He was perhaps 29, built broad in the shoulders, with a quiet, sun-weathered face that looked older than his years. His eyes were the color of faded denim, and they held no welcome, only a deep, bottomless vigilance. "Isaiah Fort," Elowen said, her voice a dry rasp. She stopped, her hands held open, away from the rifle she carried. "He sent me." The man's gaze flickered to her rifle, then back to her face. He studied her for a long, silent moment, taking in the matted hair, the bruised-looking eyes, the hollows of her cheeks. He saw she was half Navajo. He saw she was starving. He saw she was in a kind of trouble that could easily spill over. Finally, he lowered the rifle, but he did not put it down. He simply rested the stock on his hip. "Wyatt Ellison," he said. His voice was quiet, a low burr. "The debt is paid. Isaiah knows that." "This is not a debt," Elowen said, her own pride rising. "It is a trade. I need a place. I will work." Wyatt Ellison looked at her, then at the barn, then at the endless line of fences that needed mending. He looked back at her hands, already scarred from her journey. "Barn needs mucking," he said. "There's a cot in the tack room. Water pump is by the kitchen." He nodded toward the house. "My sister, June. You scare her. You're gone. You bring trouble here. You're gone." He did not ask her name. He did not ask her past. He simply turned and propped his rifle against the wall, just inside the open door, where it was within easy reach. Elowen nodded once. She walked past him, toward the water pump, and the first part of her new life began. The cot in the tack room was hard, and it smelled of leather, horse sweat, and oil. But it was the first time in weeks Elowen had slept under a roof. She woke before dawn, her body aching, but her mind clear. June Ellison was 15, a thin, shy girl with her brother's quiet eyes and a cascade of mousy brown hair. She was mending a blanket on a large loom that took up one corner of the kitchen, and she startled like a deer when Elowen entered. "Hey, Mr. Ellison," Elowen began. "Wyatt," June supplied, her voice barely a whisper. "He's Wyatt. I'm June. Coffee's on the stove." Elowen, it turned out, was a phantom. She did the work of 2 men, driven by a restless energy that seemed to have no source and no end. She mucked the stalls, her muscles screaming. But she welcomed the pain. It was a pain she could control. She mended fences, her hands blistering, then callousing over. She helped June with the heavy work of the loom, her strength returning day by day. She did not talk, she worked. Wyatt watched her. He was a man of profound, deliberate silence. His own grief from a wife taken by cholera 2 years prior, a permanent part of the landscape, like the mountains themselves. He saw the way Elowen never let the barn door be fully closed. He saw the way she woke at the slightest sound. He saw the way she ate, quickly, her eyes always on the door, as if expecting her plate to be snatched away. He never asked. He just made sure there was always enough wood chopped for the kitchen stove. The nights were the worst. The wind in the Sangre de Cristo foothills was a living thing, a high, lonely wail that sounded like 1,000 mourning women. It clawed at the little ranch, rattling the windows, trying to find a way in. On one such night, Elowen sat on the edge of her cot in the tack room, the blanket wrapped around her hands shaking. The wind sounded like a child's cry, thin and desperate, lost in the dark. It was the sound she had heard as Crowell rode away. She could not breathe. The walls were closing in, the smell of leather and hay choking her. She stumbled out of the barn, into the roaring, moonlit dark. She did not know he was there until she saw the red glow of his pipe. Wyatt sat on the porch, his chair tilted back against the house, his feet on the rail. He was just a silhouette against the lighted kitchen window. He did not turn his head as she emerged from the barn. She walked to the far end of the porch, as far from him as she could get, and sank down onto the steps. Wrapping her arms around her knees, she stared out at the wind-tortured trees. After a long time, he spoke, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry over the wind. "Coffee's hot, in the kitchen." She did not move. He did not press. He let the pipe go out. The wind howled. From the barn, a horse stamped, a nervous sound. And then Elowen began to hum. It was not a song, not at first, just a low sound in her throat, a way to anchor herself against the storm of her own memory. Then, slowly, it found the shape of a melody. It was a Navajo song, a lullaby her father had sung to her, a song about the sacredness of the firstborn, about the protection of the holy people. She sang it for Rowan. She sang it into the wind, a desperate, fragile offering to a child she could not hold. Wyatt sat, unmoving. He heard the deep, aching love in the melody. He heard the unbearable pain, and he heard the way her voice caught. A small, sharp sound like a breaking string. On the very last note, she could not finish it. A long silence fell, filled only by the wind. Finally, Wyatt stood. His chair scraped the porch. Elowen flinched, but he did not come near her. He walked to the door, opened it, and went inside. A moment later, he returned. He set a heavy mug on the porch rail, 5 feet from her. Then he went back to his chair, tilted it back, and resumed his silent watch. The steam from the mug rose in the cold air. It was black coffee, strong and scalding. Elowen did not look at him, but after a minute, her hand stole out, her fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. She drank. The bitterness cut through the cold. It was an anchor. She began her own training the next day. Wyatt had a few head of cattle, and one afternoon a coyote had been worrying a calf. Elowen had grabbed her rifle, but by the time she had it shouldered, the coyote was a dot in the distance. The rifle was too slow, too long. She needed something faster. She traded her work. She told Wyatt she would clear the south pasture of rocks, a 2-week job, in exchange for a box of handgun cartridges. He looked at her, then at her hard, calloused hands. 44 or 38. 38, she said. Isaiah had left her a Colt revolver, tucked in her pack. Wyatt nodded. Boxes in the barn, on the shelf. After that, every evening, just before sunset, the ranch would hear it. 5 shots, fired in slow, deliberate succession. Pop, 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 pop. Wyatt and June would be in the kitchen, and at the first shot, June would look up, her eyes wide. Wyatt would just continue stirring his stew. Elowen did not waste the bullets. She set up tin cans on a fence post. At first, she missed more than she hit, but she was patient. She was her father's daughter. She learned to control her breathing. She learned to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. Each report was a word. I am coming for you. Each time she reloaded, she did not see a tin can. She saw a starched white collar. She saw a leering, tobacco-stained face. She became a very good shot. The news from Isaiah arrived not as a man, but as a piece of paper, delivered by a traveling tinker who owed Wyatt for a mended wheel. The tinker handed Wyatt a small, folded note along with a receipt for horseshoe nails. Wyatt waited until the tinker was gone. He found Elowin in the barn, currying a bay mare. He did not speak, just held out the note. Elowin's hands were covered in horsehair. She wiped them on her pants, but they were still shaking as she took the paper. The note was brief, the handwriting precise. Fort Marrow, North Side, Mogollon Rim, protected. Taking children through Kama Valley. Crowell has warrants, signed by the county. He is legal. That was all. Elowin read it twice. Warrants, legal. The words hammered into her. This was not just one man, it was a system. Crowell was not just a kidnapper. He was a shielded, state-sanctioned monster. She folded the paper, her face pale, her eyes burning. Wyatt watched her. He saw her sway. He saw her close her eyes and grip the stall door to steady herself. He did not ask what was in the note. He did not offer comfort. He just said, "I'm adding a room, on the porch. Need your help hauling the lumber tomorrow." She looked at him, confused. The paper crumpled in her fist. "A room." "For you," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He pointed to the tack room, then back to the house. "You're not a horse. You shouldn't be sleeping in a barn." It took them 3 weeks. Wyatt was a meticulous builder. He was building for the winters, not for the summers. He built it small, but he built it strong. Elowin worked beside him, sawing planks, holding beams, driving nails. The physical work was a blessing, a place to pour her rage, her fear, her impatience. As he was finishing the door frame, he stopped. He looked at the heavy wooden door he had built. He looked at the large iron lock he held in his hand. Then he looked at Elowin. He said nothing. He tossed the lock onto the woodpile. He built a new door, a simple half-door, Dutch style, that opened in 2 pieces, straight onto the porch. It had a simple wooden latch on the inside. A latch, not a lock. "Storms come up," he said, his voice gruff, as if embarrassed. "This way, you don't have to be afraid of a locked door. You can get out if you need to." Elowin stared at the door, not afraid of a locked door. He had seen her terror, the terror she thought she had hidden so well, the terror of being trapped, the terror of the ropes, the wagon wheel. He had seen it, and he had not named it. He had just fixed it. Her throat tightened. For the first time since she had written Rowan's name on the rock, Elowin Hart felt the sting of tears. She turned away quickly, so he would not see. That night, a real storm blew in, a late-season norther that carried the first hint of ice. Wyatt and Elowin were on the roof of the porch, Wyatt nailing down a loose piece of tin, Elowin holding the lantern. The wind was a fury, trying to rip the lantern from her grip. "Hold it steady!" Wyatt yelled over the roar. He finished driving the nail and turned, his hand reaching for the lantern. "Give it here." His hand, calloused and hard from the hammer, brushed against her wrist as he took the light. It was nothing, a scrape of skin on skin. But to Elowin, it was a thunderclap. It was the first human touch she had felt in months that was not violent. It was simple, accidental, and warm. His skin was rough, but his hand was steady. She looked at him, in the wild, swinging light of the lantern. His face was all sharp angles and shadows. His gaze was focused on the roof, on the work, but she saw his jaw tighten. Just for a second. He had felt it too. He secured the lantern. "Go on," he shouted. "Get inside, I'll finish this." She scrambled down, her heart pounding a strange, new rhythm against her ribs. From that moment, the space between them changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, powerful awareness. It was in the stable, when he would pass her a bridle, their shoulders brushing. It was a skipped breath, a jolt of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. It was in the kitchen, when June would be reading, and Elowen would be mending a shirt, and Wyatt would be oiling a saddle piece. The silence was companionable, but it was electric. Elowen found herself watching his hands. Strong hands. Hands that could build a room, tame a horse, and pass a lantern with a gentleness that undid her. This new feeling terrified her. It was a betrayal. It was a distraction. Her life was a single, cold purpose, Rowan. But Wyatt Ellison had built her a room with a door that did not lock. He had given her coffee in the night. He had seen her pain and had not tried to fix it, only to sit with it. And as she lay in her new room, listening to the wind and the rain, she felt a different kind of ache. It was not the cold void of loss. It was the slow, painful, terrifying warmth of something new, something she had thought was dead forever, beginning to thaw. The second note arrived just like the first, clutched in the grubby hand of the tinker, who had returned for a bag of oats and a bit of gossip. He seemed to relish his role as a bearer of grim tidings. He found Wyatt mending a harness and Elowen stacking firewood on the porch of her small, new room. Wyatt took the folded paper. He had been expecting it. He had seen the way Elowen had started looking south every evening, her body humming with a terrible, contained impatience. He handed the note to her. This time, she did not bother to wipe the wood dust from her hands. It was Isaiah's hand, but the words were colder, as if he had been forced to write them in a hurry, with a pen dipped in ice. Rooker did not keep him. He sold the boy to Crowell, a private transaction, filed in the territorial court. I saw the paper. The charge was reimbursement for rescue. The file is sealed. The boy is listed as unverified orphan, male, ID Calder 37. They have given him a number. I am moving to follow the transport. Do not move. Wait. Elowen read the note. She read it again, and a third time. She did not cry. She did not scream. The fire in her eyes, the one that had burned so hot and clean for months, simply went out. The paper slipped from her fingers. Elowen, Wyatt's voice was low, cautious. She turned to him, her face a mask of such utter, hollow desolation that it stopped his breath. She looked through him. They gave him a number, she whispered. The whisper was the only sound in the world. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. The strength that had carried her across the Llano, that had healed her body, that had built calluses on her hands and walls around her heart, evaporated. It was a phantom strength, and this single piece of paper had proven it. Her knees buckled. It was not a feint. It was a surrender. Her body simply gave up. Wyatt was there. He had moved without thinking, dropping the harness, bridging the 2 steps between them. He caught her before she hit the porch. She was limp, a dead weight, her head falling back. He lifted her. She weighed nothing. He carried her the 3 steps into her room and set her on the cot. She curled onto her side, her back to him, her knees drawn up, her hands clutching her stomach. She was silent. She was breathing, but she was gone. Weil stood over her, his own hands, large and rough, hanging uselessly at his sides. He was a man of action, a man of wood and iron and horses. He did not know how to fix this. He could not build a wall against this kind of pain. He did the only thing he could. He sat in the small, straight-backed chair in the corner. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He just sat, a solid, unmoving presence, as the sun went down and the room filled with a cold, blue darkness. June brought a tray of food. He sent her away. Hours passed. The wind rose, the same wind that had always haunted her. It rattled the Dutch door. Finally, her voice came from the shadows, so small he almost missed it. Wyatt! I'm here. She uncurled, and he heard her sit up on the cot. He could barely see her, just a shape against the pale wood of the wall. He's not a person to them, she said, her voice dead. He's a number. He's 37. We will find him. Elowen. He said it with a certainty he did not feel. No. Her voice was sharp, and now he could see her head turn toward him. You don't understand. I am gone. The woman who is going to find him, she can't feel this, she can't, and I am so cold. He heard her take a ragged breath. She was shaking. The chill was not from the wind. It was from the absolute zero of her despair. Wyatt, she said, and her voice was different. It was not a whisper. It was a plea, raw and terrified. I am asking, I need one night, please, not to forget. I can never forget, but I need to remember. I need to remember that I am alive. He stood up. His heart was hammering against his ribs. A heavy, painful beat. He understood what she was asking. He understood the profound, desperate need beneath the words. She was not asking for pleasure. She was asking for life. She was asking for a single, warm, human moment to hold against the void. He walked to the cot. He stood before her. She looked up, her face a pale oval in the dark, her eyes huge, black pools of shadow. He did not have to speak. He simply held out his hand. Her own hand, calloused from the axe, shaking, rose and met his. Her skin was ice. He wrapped his fingers around hers, his own calluses grating against hers. He pulled her gently to her feet. She stood before him, trembling from head to foot. She was not just a woman, she was a battlefield, and she was losing. He did not kiss her. He did not pull her into an embrace. He kept hold of her hand and led her the 2 steps to the Dutch door. He pushed the top half open. The wind rushed in, cold and smelling of pine and distant rain. It billowed the thin curtain. He turned her to face him, his back to the open night. He raised his other hand, slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. He cupped her jaw. She flinched. His hand stopped, his fingers just grazing her skin. He saw it then, in a sliver of moonlight, a thin, white line, a scar, running from her temple into her hairline. He looked at his own hand on her face, a hand that was rough, stained, and twice the size of hers. He thought of her request. He thought of his dead wife. He thought of the trouble this could bring. Elowen, he said, his voice rough. Are you sure? For an answer. She did not speak. She took his hand from her face. She held it, then moved it, placing his palm flat against her chest, over her heart. She pressed it there, hard. It's safe here, she whispered. He felt the frantic, bird-like beating of her heart under his palm, and he understood. She was not just talking about him. She was talking about her. This was the one place, this small, wild heart, that Crowell had not numbered. He leaned in, slowly. His first kiss was not on her mouth. It was on the scar at her temple. It was a prayer. It was an apology. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the day she was tied to the wagon wheel. He brought his other hand up, cupping her face, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. He looked into her eyes, and he saw the woman behind the warrior. He saw the Elowen who had been, the Elowen who still was. Then he kissed her mouth. It was slow, tentative, and full of sorrow. It was a kiss of shared grief. It was the taste of salt, of dust, of coffee, of the cold night air. She was hesitant, her lips barely moving, as if she had forgotten how. He drew back. It's all right, he murmured against her skin. Breathe. He led her back to the cot and sat, pulling her down beside him. He did not push her. He did not lay her down. He just sat, holding her hand, his back against the wall. She turned, shifting, and laid her head on his shoulder. He could feel the tension in her, a coiled spring. He began to talk, his voice a low rumble. He talked about the ranch, about a foal that had been born that spring, about the way his father had taught him to set a fence post. Stupid things, simple things. He talked, and the warmth of his voice, the simple, solid presence of him, began to soak into her. Her shaking slowly began to ease. She lifted her head. She looked at him, and this time, when she leaned in, she was the one who was sure. The kiss was different. It was not fire. It was embers. It was a slow, deep, deliberate seeking of warmth. His lips were rough, chapped by the wind. Her fingers, which had been clutching her knees, uncurled. They rose, tracing the line of his jaw. She felt the stubble, the living, rough texture of him. He moved his own hand, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her collarbone. Exposed by her simple shirt, his touch was a question. Her answer was to lean into it. He gathered her closer, and the wool blanket from the end of the cot was pulled up, a shared shield against the cold. They were still sitting, their legs tangled, their bodies turned toward each other. The top half of the door remained wide open. The wind was a third presence in the room, a cool, clean reminder of the outside world, a promise that this was not a trap. His fingers found the scar on her wrist, the one from the rope. He held her wrist, his thumb rubbing the puckered skin. She did not pull away. She, in turn, found a scar on his hand, a long white line from a long-ago knife slip. She traced it, from his knuckle to his wrist. It was an exchange of maps, an exchange of damage. It was not about forgetting. It was about being seen, scars and all, and not being turned away. He deepened the kiss, and a new heat, a slow, rising tide, began to build. It was the heat of life, the friction of two solitary, broken things finding a moment of wholeness, the smell of the raw pine walls, the scratch of the wool, the sound of their breathing beginning to match, to deepen. Her heart, under his hand, was no longer frantic. It was beating, strong and steady. In time with his... He pulled back, his breath misting in the cold air from the open door. He rested his forehead against hers. They stayed that way for a long time, just breathing each other in. She was warm, for the first time in months. She was truly, deeply warm. The cold void inside her was, for a moment, filled. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "I'm leaving." He felt the words, a vibration against his own skin. She was not running to him. She was refueling from him, and it made him love her in a way that scared him. "I know," he said, his voice thick. He kissed her forehead. He pulled back, looking into her clear, storm-gray eyes. "I'm coming with you." Elowen's eyes widened. "Wyatt, no, this is not your fight. It is my—" "I'm coming with you," he repeated. It was not a debate. It was a statement of fact. He was a man who built things to last. He would not, could not, let her go into this alone. Before she could argue, a new sound cut through the wind. A sharp, whistled three-note call. Bob White. It was not a quail, not at this time of night. Wyatt was on his feet in an instant, pushing Elowen behind him, his hand reaching for the pistol he always kept on the small table. The call came again, closer. "It's all right," Elowen said, her hand on his arm. "Wyatt, it's all right." She stepped past him to the open door. "Isaiah," she called into the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the barn. Isaiah Fort stepped into the dim light of the porch. He was caked in dust, his face gaunt, his rifle held in one hand, muzzle down. He looked at Elowen. He looked at Wyatt, standing in the doorway of her room. He looked at the rumpled blanket on the cot. His face, as always, was impossible to read. He simply nodded. Once, a sharp, tired gesture. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low rasp. "All of us, in the kitchen, now." He walked past them, into the main house, as if he owned it. Elowen and Wyatt looked at each other. The warmth of the moment was gone, blasted away by the cold wind of their reality. Isaiah was in the kitchen, lighting the lamp. He had already put the coffee pot on the cold stove. When they entered, he was unrolling a package on the main table. "He's moving them," Isaiah said, without preamble. He did not look up. "Crowell is moving the whole school. A new shipment of children, including the ones from Merrow. He's taking them to a depot at Silver Spur. He's moving them in 3 days." He unrolled a piece of canvas. On it was a detailed, hand-drawn map of Fort Merrow and the route to Silver Spur. "But more important," Isaiah said, his voice dropping, "is this—" He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small, greasy leather pouch. He opened it and spilled its contents onto the map. It was a small, crudely made necklace, a single, pearlescent seashell, drilled with a hole, on a leather thong. "They took the boy's name," Isaiah said, his finger pushing the shell into the lamplight. "But they left him this. I saw Rooker put it on him. It's how they mark the new ones. It's how they count their saved souls at the depot." Elowen stared at the seashell. It was a tiny, fragile, beautiful thing, and it was the first real piece of her son she had touched since his birth. She looked at Wyatt, her eyes no longer soft, but blazing with the cold, hard fire of her returned purpose. He nodded at her, a silent promise. The war had begun. They left the Ellison ranch under a sliver of moon, a pale, sharp sickle in a black sky. They were 3 ghosts, Wyatt's 2 best horses, a mule laden with supplies, and the heavy flour wagon that served as their disguise. June, her face pale and brave, had waved them off, her real task only just beginning to stay near the town's telegraph office and listen. Isaiah led. He was not a man, but an element, a piece of the night. He guided them down into the Abiquiu Wash, a dry riverbed that was a gray, sandy scar on the land. Their movements were a study in silent precision. They walked the horses on the packed sand, their hooves making almost no sound. When they had to cross rock, they did so slowly, one measured step at a time. Behind them, Wyatt and Elowen worked as a team. Every hour, they would stop. Elowen would break off handfuls of yucca leaves, their edges sharp as razors, and Wyatt would use them to brush their tracks, a trick Isaiah had insisted upon. It was tedious, back-breaking work, but it was the work of survival. They erased themselves from the land as they moved across it. They traveled for 2 nights, sleeping in cold camps during the heat of the day, hidden in box canyons or thickets of juniper. The tension was a living thing, a 4th member of their party. Elowen and Wyatt spoke little, their moment on the porch a fragile, unmentioned ember, banked against the cold reality of their mission. Their purpose was a single, hard point of light, Fort Merrow. On the 3rd night, they reached the perimeter. It was not a fort in the military sense, but a sprawling, fenced compound in a high, lonely valley. A single road led in, cutting through a checkpoint. 2 guards, lazy and cold, stood by a fire, their rifles propped against a barrier. "Showtime," Isaiah murmured. He had changed, his posture sinking, his eyes dulling. He was no longer a scout. He was a hired hand. "Stay covered," Wyatt said to Elowen, who was huddled under a pile of blankets in the back of the wagon. He tugged his hat low and clicked his tongue at the horses, moving the wagon forward. Isaiah rode just ahead, leading the spare horses. He stopped at the gate. "What's this, then?" one of the guards called out, a man with a thick, beer-soaked voice. "Flour," Isaiah said, his voice slow, subservient. "For the depot, and horses for Judge Crowell's man, Mr. Rooker. Got a bill of sale right here." He fumbled in his pocket, a perfect picture of a man trying not to cause trouble. The guard grunted and took the paper. Wyatt pulled the wagon up, the horses stamping. "Evening, gentlemen," Wyatt said, his voice the easy, neutral tone of a teamster. "Long haul. Be glad to get this off my hands." The second guard, younger, walked toward the wagon. His lantern held high. He peered at Wyatt, then at the heavy canvas covering the back. "What else you got?" the young guard asked. Just my wife, Wyatt said, his voice tight. She's sick. Took a fever in Santa Fe. Trying to get her to my sister's place in Silver Spur, but I gotta drop this flower first. The guard's eyes narrowed. He moved to the back of the wagon. Let's see her. Now, son, Wyatt said, his voice hardening. You don't want to do that. It's a woman's sickness, and she's sleeping. I'd hate to have to wake her. From under the blankets, Elowin let out a low, convincing moan, a sound of pure, shivering misery. The young guard recoiled, pulling his hand back as if from a fire. Ugh, all right, go on through, but be quick about it. Thank you, son, Wyatt said. God bless you. The barrier was raised. Wyatt guided the wagon through, his back ramrod straight, his hands steady on the reins. They rolled into the compound, the gate closing behind them with a heavy, final thud. Isaiah led them to a dark warehouse, set apart from the main dormitories. This is it, he whispered. The receiving depot. This is where they process the goods. And the children. Wyatt unhitched the wagon, a natural act for any teamster. Elowin slipped out of the back, her hooded cloak pulled low, and she and Isaiah melted into the shadow of the building. Isaiah worked on the lock, his tools a small, precise set of wires. The lock clicked open. The air inside was stale, smelling of paper dust, lye, and a faint, sour odor of unwashed bodies. It was a long room, filled with crates, sacks of grain, and, at the far end, a single desk with a lamp. The ledgers, Isaiah whispered, pointing. Elowin moved toward the desk, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Isaiah stood guard at the door, Wyatt at the wagon, 2 soldiers in a silent war. The ledger was open. It was a book of souls. Names, dates, locations. She saw the names of children she knew from the mission, their heritage listed as a condition to be cured. And then she found it. Her hand, shaking, traced the line. Rowan Hart. The name was written in a clean, clerk's hand, and then a thick, angry line of black ink was drawn through it. Beside it, in a different, spikier hand, was the new entry. Calder 37. She touched it. Calder 37. Her son, her Rowan. He was a number in a book, a piece of inventory in a dusty, cold warehouse. She stood there, her entire body numb, the hatred from the first night returning, but now it was not hot. It was a glacial cold, a thing of absolute, killing focus. Bong! 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 A heavy iron bell rang out across the compound, a frantic, jarring sound. Elowin snapped her head up. Shouts erupted from the dormitories. Lights flared to life. We've been found, Elowin whispered, her hand dropping to the Colt at her hip. Isaiah was at her side, grabbing her arm. No, not a discovery. That's a summons. An emergency. Wyatt was at the door. Isaiah Ryder coming in. Hard. A lone horseman galloped into the compound, waving a piece of paper. He slid his horse to a stop in front of the main building, shouting, Telegraph from Silver Spur Crowls, move the schedule. He wants the shipment now, tonight. Elowin, Isaiah, and Wyatt looked at each other in the dim light. Their plan to scout was gone. The war was here. June, Wyatt said, his voice full of a sudden, fierce pride. That was June. She got the word out. Crowell's spooked, Isaiah said, his mind racing. He knows I'm here. He's trying to get the children out before I can act. Then we act, Elowin said, her voice flat. She ripped the page from the ledger. She shoved it inside her shirt, the paper crackling against her skin. It was her proof. They were back in the wagon in seconds, Wyatt at the reins. We leave now, the way we came in, he said. But as they neared the gate, the yard was swarming. The entire compound was in chaos. Guards running, children being hustled out of dormitories. And then, a voice cut through the noise. Hold that wagon, the flower wagon! It was Rooker. He stood on the steps of the main house, a rifle in his hand, his face a mask of fury. He had been expecting them. Wyatt did not hesitate. He did not go to the gate. He snapped the reins, yelling, "Here!" and wheeled the heavy wagon. Not toward the road, but toward the fence. "Hold on!" he roared. He drove the wagon straight at the weakest point in the perimeter, a section of simple pine fencing. The horses, sensing the panic, lunged. The wagon hit the fence with a sound of splintering, cannon-like wood. For a second, it held, and then it burst apart. They were through, thundering into the open darkness, bullets snapping over their heads, Rooker's curses lost in the wind. "The Chama Bridge," Isaiah yelled, riding up alongside. "It's the only way they can take the main shipment. We can cut them off." They rode as they had never ridden, the wagon bouncing and groaning. Wyatt a master. Guiding it over the rough terrain, they were a mile ahead. Taking a shortcut, Isaiah knew. When they reached the bridge, it was a narrow, wooden trestle bridge, spanning a deep, rocky arroyo. The river below was a silver thread in the dark. "Stop!" Elowen said, her voice sharp. Wyatt pulled the horses to a halt. "What?" "Someone's there." In the middle of the bridge, a single, broad silhouette was waiting, a lit cigarillo glowing red in the dark. Rooker. He had cut them off. He had known the shortcut. "Well, well," Rooker's voice echoed, oily and triumphant. He had his own wagon, a heavy freight wagon, blocking the far end of the bridge. The savage, the N-word scout, and the traitor. "Judge said you'd be trouble. He's paying a bonus for all three of you. Dead." "Get out of the way, Rooker," Wyatt said, his voice low. "I don't think so." Rooker laughed. "I'm going to enjoy this." He raised his rifle. Wyatt didn't wait for the shot. He roared, a sound of pure, primal rage, and drove his team forward. The flour wagon leaped onto the bridge, its wheels thundering on the planks. Rooker fired. The shot went wide, splintering the side of the wagon. Elowen and Isaiah fired back, their shots forcing Rooker to duck behind his own wagon. But Wyatt wasn't stopping. He was aiming his wagon, not at Rooker, but at Rooker's horses. "Wyatt, no!" Elowen screamed. He didn't hit them. At the last second, he hauled on the reins, skidding his wagon sideways, slamming the heavy vehicle into the side of Rooker's freight wagon. The impact was bone-jarring. Wood splintered. Horses screamed. Rooker was thrown from his cover, his rifle clattering to the planks. He came up, his knife in his hand, and lunged at Wyatt. Wyatt, still on the wagon seat, kicked out, catching Rooker in the chest. Rooker stumbled back, right into the path of his own terrified, rearing horses, one of the draft horses. Eyes white with terror, slammed its shoulder into Rooker. Rooker's body hit the low, wooden railing of the bridge. It cracked, it held, and then, with a slow, tearing groan, it gave way. Rooker screamed, a high, thin sound, as he toppled over the edge. He didn't fall clean. He hit the rocks of the embankment, and they heard the sickening, sharp crack of bone. He tumbled, a rag doll, and lay still in the shadows, half in, half out of the shallow water. Silence. The only sound was the wind and the stamping of the horses. Wyatt, his face white, leaped down. Isaiah was right behind him. His rifle ready, they scrambled down the bank. Rooker was alive, barely. His leg was bent at an impossible angle. He was groaning, his hand feebly reaching for a pistol. Isaiah kicked it away. We should leave him," Wyatt said, his voice shaking. "No," Isaiah said. He pulled a rope from his saddle. "We're not murderers. We're not him." They tied him, splinted his leg as best they could, and left him bound by the side of the road, where the first posse would find him. Elowen had come down the bank. She did not look at Rooker. She looked at the ground near where he had fallen. She knelt. Her fingers closed around a leather thong in the dirt. She stood up, and in the moonlight, she opened her hand. There, in her palm, was the seashell necklace. He must have been carrying it, perhaps to give to the man who would take her son. She closed her fist around it. She did not cry. Her face was granite. This was her proof. This was her son's dog tag. "Elowen," Wyatt said, his voice gentle. A new sound, a small, terrified whimper. It came from Rooker's wagon. Isaiah was there in a second. He tore back the canvas. It was not full of supplies. 3 small children, none older than 5, were huddled in the back. They were chained. Wyatt used an axe to break the chains, his face a mask of thunder. "We can't go to Silver Spur," Isaiah said, his voice urgent. "Not with these. Crowell will have the whole territory looking for us now." "Where?" Elowen asked, her arm around the smallest child. "A little girl." "Vallecito," Isaiah said. "There's a woman there, a healer, Luz Ortega. She fears no man, not even Crowell." They pushed Rooker's wagon into the arroyo, hiding it. They loaded the children into their own, and they rode, not south, but east, into the high mountains. They arrived at the small village of Vallecito just before dawn. 3 exhausted adults and 3 terrified, silent children. Luz Ortega met them at the door of her small, adobe home, a lamp in her hand. She was an old woman, her face a map of wrinkles, her black eyes seeing everything. She looked at Isaiah, at Wyatt, at Elowen. She looked at the children. She said nothing. She simply stood aside and held the door open, letting them into the warmth and the smell of sage and cedar. As the sun rose, a telegraph message was already clicking its way across the territory. Abram Crowell, in a righteous fury, was offering a $500 reward. $500 for the capture of the blasphemers who had attacked his school, kidnapped his charges, and assaulted his man. He swore on a stack of Bibles that he would teach this lesson, a lesson of fire and brimstone. To the unholy Trinity who had dared to defy God's law, the hunt was on. 18 years is a long time in the basin, long enough for rock to turn to sand, for rivers to carve new paths, for a boy to become a man. The man on the horse moved like a shadow in the late afternoon heat. He was a creature of the high desert, lean and long-limbed, with his father's Navajo stillness and his mother's Irish eyes, the color of a winter sky. He sat the horse not as a rider, but as a part of it, silent as a hawk's feather. Around his neck, tucked inside his shirt, lay a single pearlescent seashell on a worn leather thong. It was always warm against his skin. His name was Calder Fort Hart. He was not lost. He was, as he had been for his entire life, searching. He had been raised in a hidden canyon by a man who was all iron and shadow. A man who had taught him 3 things: how to read, how to shoot, and how to track. Isaiah Fort had been a hard teacher, but a patient one. He had taught the boy to read from Shakespeare and the Bible, so he would understand the words of his enemies. He taught him to shoot a rifle, so he would fear no man. And he taught him to track, not just a man over stone, but a story through time. "You are not an orphan," Isaiah had told him, his voice as rough as the canyon wall. When the boy was old enough to ask, "You are a man with a purpose. You were born to find your mother." Calder's memory of her was not a memory. It was a fragment, a dream, a ghost in his blood. It was the smell of wood smoke and wet wool. It was the feeling of a warm, calloused hand spread flat against his infant chest, a feeling of absolute, perfect safety. And it was a sound, a low-pitched lullaby, the words meaningless, the melody a rising, falling ache that he could sometimes almost catch in the sound of the wind, a face, a name, a place. Nothing, just a warmth, a smell, and a song. It was not enough. His quest had begun not with a memory, but with a failure born of fire. 18 years ago. Timeline A, the past. Elowen, Wyatt, and Isaiah left the children with Luz Ortega, the healer's blessing, a ward of sage smoke in their hair. They rode with a new, grim urgency. The reward for their capture had been posted in 2 territories. They were fugitives now, united by a crime of compassion. They crossed the Mongolian Rim in a single, brutal, 36-hour push. The land was a beautiful, savage enemy, all sheer cliffs and sudden, forested mesas. Wyatt was their rock, his calm, rancher's strength a counterbalance to Elowin's burning, frantic energy. Isaiah was their eyes, his mind a map of Crowell's probable moves. And Elowin was a blade, honed to a single point. The seashell necklace was looped around her wrist. She felt its smooth, nacreous surface with her thumb, day and night. It was her son. The Silver Spur Depot was not a fort. It was a wound in the earth, a railroad terminus surrounded by corrals, warehouses, and a high timber slat fence. It was a place of transit, of industry, of profit. "He is not a man of God," Isaiah whispered, the 3 of them lying flat on a ridge, looking down at the depot. "He is a man of commerce. This is where he sells his souls." The depot was in chaos. A train, steam already up, sat on the tracks. Guards, not soldiers, but hired guns, herded groups of children from a long, low barracks toward the cattle cars. "No," Elowin whispered, her voice sick. "He's not cattle cars." "It's faster," Isaiah said, his voice hard. "And it's cheap." "Where?" Elowin scanned the crowd, her eyes frantic. "I don't see him." "He will be in a crate," Isaiah said, pointing to a separate wagon. "He's not a child to them. He's special. He's Calder 37. He's property." "The warehouse," Wyatt said, pointing. "The one by the water tower. They're loading the special cargo there." Their plan had been to sneak in, but the chaos was their cover. A spark, a curse, and a sudden, blossoming flower of orange. A guard, smoking by the loading dock, had tossed his cigarillo. It landed in a pool of spilled oil from a leaky drum. The whoomph of the ignition was instant. The oil drum went up, and then a stack of dry crates beside it. The fire, fed by the wind and the dry wood, engulfed the side of the warehouse in seconds. "The fire!" Elowin screamed. But Isaiah grabbed her. "No, not the fire. The fire!" He understood. "It's our chance." Pandemonium. Guards ran toward the fire, not away from it, trying to save the cargo. Children screamed. The train whistle shrieked. "Now!" Isaiah yelled. The 3 of them moved as one. They ran, not from the fire, but with it. Using the smoke as a shield, they stormed the loading dock. Wyatt was a bulwark, knocking a guard off his feet. Isaiah moved like smoke, his knife flashing, cutting the ropes on a stack of cargo, creating a barrier. Elowin only had eyes for one thing. The manifest, nailed to a post. It was already starting to curl from the heat. Her eyes found the number. Crate 37. J. Crowell. Personal. "There!" she screamed. It was a large wooden crate, set apart from the others, just inside the burning door. "Elowin, no!" Wyatt yelled. "The roof!" The smoke was a black, choking wall. She did not care. She tied her kerchief over her face and ran straight into the inferno. It was hell. The heat was a physical blow, searing her lungs, her eyebrows. Her eyes, streaming, could barely see, but she saw the number, stenciled in black, 37. She reached it, her hands burning as she touched the wood. "Rowan!" she screamed, her voice a raw croak. "Rowan!" It was not a child's cry that answered. It was the groan of a dying building. She fumbled with the lid. It was nailed shut. She used the butt of her pistol, smashing at the latch, splintering the wood. She tore at it with her bare, bleeding hands. The lid came free. She looked inside. It was empty. No, not empty. There was a small, straw-filled mattress and a single, rough, gray wool blanket. identical to the one she had been given at the mission. She stared. The world dissolved. The roaring in her ears was not the fire, it was the sound of her own soul tearing in half. He was not here. He was gone. This was a shell. This was a lie. No. A heavy timber, wreathed in flame, crashed down from the ceiling, landing where she had been standing 2 seconds before. A hard arm wrapped around her waist, crushing the air from her. "He's not worth you," Isaiah's voice roared in her ear. He dragged her, kicking and screaming his name, out of the inferno. He threw her from the loading dock, onto the ground, just as the entire roof of the warehouse collapsed, sending a volcano of sparks and embers into the night sky. Wyatt was there, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go now." The pursuit was already forming. A group of armed men silhouetted against the flames. A lantern was raised. A shout of, "There!" Wyatt did not run. He stood, raised his rifle, and fired. Clink! The lantern exploded, plunging the men into darkness. "Run!" he yelled. He fired again, and a second lantern, 50 yards away, shattered. He was not shooting to kill. He was shooting out the light. He was giving them the darkness they needed. They ran to the horses, and they rode. The sound of the train's whistle and the shouts of Crowell's men fading behind them. They stopped, 5 miles out, on a high bluff. They watched the train, a fiery serpent, pull away from the burning depot, heading east, carrying its cargo of stolen children into the dark. Elowen stood, her face black with soot, her hands raw, the seashell necklace still on her wrist. She had failed. Her son was on that train, and she was not. "Crowell won," she whispered, the words a surrender. "No," Isaiah said, his voice quiet, his face hard in the moonlight. "He didn't. He ran." Wyatt put his arm around her, and for the first time, she did not pull away. She leaned her full, exhausted weight against him and wept. Silent, dry, agonizing tears. The report, filed by Judge Crowell the next day, was a masterpiece of righteous indignation. He spoke of a heathen cabal, a satanic fire, and a desperate act of sacrilege by the fugitive Elowen Hart and her accomplices. The fire, he claimed, had been set to destroy God's work, and in the chaos, under the cover of his own false report, he had the paperwork for Calder 37 destroyed. He moved the child from the main group. He changed the name. He erased the trail. The fire, which he had not set, had become his greatest blessing. Timeline B, the present. 18 years. Calder Fort Hart sat at a rough-hewn pine table, in a small, clean cabin high in the canyon. The light of a single kerosene lamp cast a warm, golden glow. In his hand was a single piece of paper, yellowed, brittle, and scorched at the edges. Isaiah had pulled it from Elowen's shirt that night, after she had collapsed from exhaustion. He had saved it. He had kept it for this boy. Calder traced the faded ink, the neat clerk's hand, Rowan Hart. The angry, spiked handwriting, a line drawn through the name Calder 37. His name, his number. He looked at the map that had been on the table that night. He looked at the ledger page. He had been staring at them his entire life. They were his only inheritance. He was not a child of fire and smoke. He was a man of paper and ink, of a name crossed out, of a number assigned. His hand, which was not a child's hand, strong and calloused, closed over the seashell necklace at his throat. He felt the smooth, cool surface. He squeezed, the leather thong biting into his skin. He knew his mother's name. He knew the name of the man who had taken him. And now, after 18 years, Isaiah had finally told him where to start. The Ellison Ranch. He stood, the chair scraping the floor. His quest was not a memory. It was beginning. The trail to the Ellison Ranch was cold. 18 years cold. Calder Fort Hart found it not by following tracks, but by following a rumor, a story that Isaiah had helped him piece together from whispers and old maps. The San Juan Basin was a harsh, wind-scoured country. When he finally found the valley, the ranch was gone. It was a skeleton, a memory. The house was a heap of rotted-out pine and collapsed river stone. The wind, which had once howled around Eloin's new room, now whistled through the bare, silvered bones of the barn. The great, sturdy barn, which had been a place of safety and quiet awareness, was just a rib cage against the sky. Calder sat on his horse, Ashfall, and surveyed the ruin. He had been chasing this place his entire life, this name, Ellison. And it was a grave. He dismounted, walking through the tall, dry grass. He touched the stone of the fallen chimney. It was cold. He had come too late. The story had ended here. But Isaiah had taught him to read the land. A place like this, a home, does not just vanish. People are moved. They are pushed. He spent 2 days in the local town, asking no questions, just listening. He heard no Ellison. He heard no Eloin. He found his answer in the place Isaiah had told him was the last resort, the last known point of sanctuary, Vallecito. Luz Ortega was no longer a woman. She was a monument. She was ancient, her face a brown, wrinkled map of the very land she had been born on. She sat by a low, sage-smelling fire in her small adobe house, and when Calder entered, she did not look up. "The old healer is gone," she said, her voice like dry leaves. "The woman you seek is a midwife now. A good one." Calder stood, his shadow filling her doorway. "You know who I am." "I know the man who raised you," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were black, bright, and saw everything. "Isaiah Fort, he was a good man. He brought me 3 children, like little birds fallen from a nest. He knew a safe place. So do I." She gave him a new name, Willow Draw. A homestead, 20 miles north, tucked so deep into a box canyon that the taxman had never found it. They went there to be erased. Luz said, her voice soft. "Be careful, boy. Sometimes a ghost is better left buried. You may be the storm they have spent 18 years hiding from." He found Willow Draw by following a creek that was not on any map. It was a small, perfect place, a cabin, not of pine, but of thick, plastered adobe. A small, neat barn, a corral with 2 good horses. It was a home built not to withstand the wind, but to hide from it. He did not ride in. He left Ashfall tied in a grove of cottonwoods and climbed the mesa that overlooked the homestead. He lay flat, his spyglass steady, and he watched. A man came out of the barn. He was broader than Calder, his hair thick and gray at the temples. He moved with a slow, deliberate strength, mending a corral post. This must be Wyatt Ellison. He looked solid, like a mountain. And then, as the sun began to dip, painting the canyon walls orange, a woman came out onto the porch. Kalt's breath caught. She was not the 22-year-old warrior of Isaiah's stories. This was a woman in her 40th year. Her black hair, pulled back in a simple braid, was shot through with silver. She moved with a quiet, careful grace, her body thicker, settled, but it was her. He knew it, in his bones, as if he had seen her every day. She was lighting a lamp, and as she turned, he saw it, tied to the latch of her door, dancing in the new breeze, was a single black crow feather, a small, simple charm, a piece of the father she had never known, a piece of the blood Crowell had tried to erase. She was still in there, the woman who had fought, the woman who had lost. She was still in there, under the quiet life of the homesteader's wife. Calder lay on the rock, his heart a hammer in his chest. He had found her. After 18 years, he had found her. And he did not move. He watched her go back inside. He watched the lamplight glow in the window. He watched Wyatt go in after her. The door closing, a curl of smoke rising from the chimney. They were a family. They were safe. Luz Ortega's words came back to him. "You may be the storm. Isaiah's words, drilled into him for a decade. The first rule of the hunt, Calder, is not to harm the prey. And the second is not to harm yourself. The third is not to harm the world you walk in. What right did he have to walk into that small, warm cabin? What right did he have to tear open a wound that had, perhaps, finally, begun to heal? He was a number. Calder 37, a ghost from a ledger. He was here to find his mother, not to destroy her. He backed away from the ridge, a cold, empty sickness in his stomach. He would go. He would leave them in peace. He had seen her. He knew she was alive. That would have to be enough. He made his camp 2 miles down the canyon, a cold camp, no fire. The night was heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. He did not sleep. He sat with his back to a rock, the seashell in his hand, his life's purpose dissolving into a bitter, adult compromise. The storm broke just after midnight, a high-country deluge that turned the dry creek bed into a shallow, roaring river. Calder, already soaked, was just securing ashfall when he heard it. A different sound, a shout, thin and female, and the terrified scream of a horse. He was moving before he thought. He ran toward the sound, his hand on his pistol, his eyes straining in the dark. A wagon, a small doctor's buggy, was skewed sideways in the new, flash-flooding creek. The water was only axle deep, but the horse was panicked by the thunder and the rushing water. It was rearing, its eyes white, threatening to snap the harness or break its own leg. A woman was trying to calm it, her voice high and tight. "Whoa, Samson, whoa, boy!" "Let him go," Calder yelled, his voice a commanding crack in the storm. "Ma'am, get back. Let go of the bridle." He waded into the churning water, his own voice a low, calming rumble. He did not go for the bridle. He went for the horse's head, his hand moving in a way Isaiah had taught him, finding the pressure point below the ear. He spoke to the horse, not in words, but in a low, vibrating hum, the same sound he had used to gentle wild mustangs. The horse stopped rearing. It snorted, its flank quivering, but it stood. "That's it, boy," Calder murmured. He unhitched the harness. "Go on, get." He slapped the horse's rump, and it scrambled up the bank. Free. He turned back to the woman. She was soaked, her face pale in the lightning flashes. She was in her 30s, with kind, intelligent eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. I was coming from a berth at the North Ranch. I thought I could beat the storm." "You all right, ma'am?" Calder asked, pulling the buggy the last few feet to the bank. "I am June Ellison." She held out a hand, then laughed as the rain streamed from her. "Well, I'm a midwife, and I seem to be in need of a hand myself." Calder's blood went cold. June, Wyatt's sister. "You're hurt," she said, her eyes narrowing, her professional manner taking over. Calder looked down. His hand, the one he had used on the horse, was bleeding. A cut from the harness buckle. "It's nothing, ma'am." "It's not nothing," she said, pulling a cloth from her bag. "Here, let me—" She stopped. Her hand froze. Her eyes were not on the cut. They were on his throat. In his haste, the seashell necklace had been pulled from his shirt. It hung starkly against his wet, dark shirt, the shell pale and luminous in the storm. "Where?" she whispered, her voice suddenly choked, her hand going to her own throat. "Where did you get that?" "It was a gift," Calder said, his voice guarded. It can't be," June stammered. She looked up at his face, at his eyes. "Oh, God! Oh, dear God! Elowen, you have your mother's eyes." They stood in the rain, the world silent save for the thunder. June Ellison, the practical, calm midwife, grabbed his arm in a grip of iron. "You are not a stranger," she said, her voice fierce. "You are a miracle. You are coming home, now." The cabin was warm. It smelled of coffee and wood smoke, the smell of his fragmented dreams. June had burst in, dragging him by the hand, her face a mask of tears and joyous, terrified awe. "Wyatt Elowen, he's here, he's here!" Wyatt was on his feet instantly, his rifle in his hand, his eyes going from June to the tall, wet stranger. But Elowen just froze. She was standing by the stove, a cup in her hand. She did not look at him. She looked at the seashell necklace. The cup dropped from her hand. It hit the floor and shattered, but no one heard it. The room was silent. Wyatt was looking at his wife. June was crying. Elowen took one slow, shuddering step. She was not looking at his face. She was looking at the shell, as if it were the sun. Her hand, the one that had held the cup, rose. It was shaking violently. "Who?" she said, her voice a dry, breaking whisper. "Are you?" Calder's heart was breaking. He had rehearsed this. He had planned to be gentle, but there was no gentle way to do this. "Ma'am," he said, his own voice thick. "My name is Calder. I'm looking for someone. A mother, a woman whose son was stolen a long time ago." Wyatt's face was white. He put his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Elowen, honey, sit down." But Elowen shook her head. She did not, could not, look away from the shell. It was the hope she had buried, the hope that had been a living torture for 18 years. It was here, on a stranger. It was a trick. It was a cruel joke. "Many sons were stolen," she whispered, her voice pleading with him, with God, to not let this be a lie. Who raised you?" It was the question, the test, the key. Calder looked at her, at this woman who was his mother. This woman with the silver-threaded hair and the eyes of a winter sky. "A righteous soldier, ma'am," he said, the words Isaiah had taught him, the words that were the truest thing he knew. A man named Isaiah Fort. The name hit her like a physical blow. The strength that had held her upright for 18 years, the strength of anger, of grief, of a life built on a foundation of loss, vanished. Her hand, which had been reaching for the shell, flew to her mouth. A sound tore from her, a sound that was not a cry, but a release, a breaking of a dam that had held for 2 decades. She did not fall. Wyatt was there, catching her, his own face buried in her hair, his arms a steel band around her as she finally collapsed. Cal Reed stood in the doorway, the rain dripping from his hat, a stranger in his own home, and watched his mother cry his name. "Rowan, Rowan, Rowan," into the chest of the man who had been his father's replacement. The circle, at last, was closed. Mac Rooker's face, already twisted with scorn, went purple. The insult had been aimed at Calder, but the collective rejection from the townsfolk landed on him. "The enforcer! Why are we listening to this?" he snarled, his hand flashing to the pistol at his hip. "Let's take the witch and the half-breed and be done." His gun was clearing the leather. He never aimed. A crack echoed from the porch, sharp and flat, faster than Rooker's draw. It was not a sound of war. It was a sound of precision. The leather strap holding Rooker's hat to his thick skull snapped, the bullet having passed clean through the raw hide. The hat flew backward. Rooker froze. His hand stalled on the grip of his pistol, his eyes wide with the sudden, cold understanding of how close his head had been to that bullet. Isaiah Fort lowered his rifle from his hip, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. He had not even shouldered the weapon. "I would not," he said, his voice quiet, carrying across the yard. The yard exploded. "Now!" Wyatt yelled. He did not fire a gun. He grabbed the heavy cast-iron oil lamp that hung from the porch eaves, lit in the pre-dawn chill and still burning low. With a heave, he ripped it from its hook and hurled it, not at a man, but at the ground in front of the militia. It shattered. oil and flame splashing across the dry dirt, creating a sudden 4-foot-high wall of smoke and fire, a line of chaos between the porch and the armed men. The militia horses screamed, rearing, breaking their line. The men shouted, confused, their vision obscured. Rooker Crowell shrieked, "Get them!" But Rooker had his own problems. Through the smoke, a shadow was moving. Calder had not waited. The moment the lamp hit the ground, he was in motion, a predator unleashed. He did not run, he dropped, crawling, using the smoke as his cover, just as Isaiah had taught him. He was a panther, a ghost. Rooker, blinded by the sun and the smoke, wiped his eyes, turning, trying to find Isaiah, the man who had shot his hat. He never saw the threat in front of him. Calder burst from the smoke. He did not lunge, he slid low and fast, sweeping Rooker's standing leg. Rooker, unbalanced, stumbled, his pistol firing uselessly into the sky. As Rooker fell backward, Calder was already on him. It was a fluid, brutal ballet. He dodged Rooker's flailing punch, locked an arm around his thick neck from behind, and applied pressure, a chokehold. Rooker gurgled, his eyes bulging, his fingers clawing at the arm. But Calder was already wrenching the pistol from Rooker's grip, smashing the man's wrist against the hard-packed earth until his fingers went numb and the gun fell. It was over in 5 seconds. Calder was up, Rooker's own pistol in his hand, aimed at the downed man. The militia, fighting their horses, were trapped behind the line of fire. They looked, stunned, at their leader, disarmed and choking in the dust. But the fight was not with the muscle, it was with the mind. Elowen Hart walked. She did not run. She walked from behind her table, through the dissipating smoke, and straight toward Abram Crowell, who stood, mouth open, by his carriage. "Stop!" Crowell demanded, fumbling inside his frock coat. "Stay back." She did not stop. She walked until she was 2 feet from him, close enough to smell the pine resin and old paper he still wore. "My son's name," she said, her voice clear and carrying, silencing the yard, "is Rowan Hart. He was born on the 5th of May, 18 years ago. You took him from me at the Llano Estacado mission wagons by the Cedar Breaks." "Lies, slander," Crowell blustered, but he was backing up against the side of his carriage. "You were wearing boots," Elowen continued, her voice a razor. "New boots. They squeaked when you walked. I remember the sound of them on the gravel, the sound of your heel dragging. I remember the calluses on your left hand, when you grabbed the paper. A writer's callus." "This is madness." "No," Reverend Harlan said, stepping off the porch, his face pale but his voice booming. He held his Bible aloft, not as a weapon, but as a shield. "This is testimony." He pointed at Crowell. "The law of God does not permit the stealing of a child. That is not doctrine, sir. That is a mortal sin. And the law of man." Marta Viteri said, stepping up beside him, her own ledger in her hand. "The law of man does not much like being cheated." She slapped the book. "I have a note, Judge, an IOU, for $500, for the founding of your school. A note you paid with a territorial draft. A draft I now see was meant for orphan supplies. You are not a savior, sir. You are a common thief." The townsfolk oaks, the ranchers, the storekeep muttered, their anger a low, rising hum. This is conspiracy," Crowell yelled, his eyes wild. "No, Judge," Isaiah said, his voice cutting through. He walked from the porch, his old, moldering ledger in his hand. He held it open. "This is procedure." He pointed to the warrant in Crowell's hand. "Your warrant, Judge, bears the seal of the Territorial Commissioner. A very impressive seal." Then he pointed to the ledger page from 18 years ago. "And this is your book, the one from Fort Marrow, the one that lists Calder 37. And here in the corner is the same seal faded, but identical. The seal of your Society for Orphan Relief. Isaiah looked at the crowd. He has used a state warrant to settle a personal, profitable crime. He has mixed his office and his sin. That, gentlemen, is a crime the governor will not ignore. It was too much. The field court had rendered its verdict. Crowell, trapped by his own arrogance, his own paperwork, finally snapped. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure, reptilian rage. He yanked a small pistol from his coat. He was not aiming at Isaiah or Wyatt. He was aiming at Aloan, the source of his failure. "You!" he shrieked and fired. Time stopped. Calder, already moving, launched himself across the yard. A desperate, impossible leap, shoving his mother from the side. "No!" The bullet, fired in panic, went wild, thwacking into the thick porch post, exploding splinters. Calder hit Aloan, sending them both to the ground. But even as they fell, Wyatt was there, his arms wrapping around Aloan, pulling her, rolling, shielding her body with his own. The spell of law was broken. The militiamen raised their rifles. They did not fire. A sound, a series of heavy clicks, stopped them. Oakes, Marta, the Reverend, and a half-dozen other ranchers who had come with Wyatt had stepped off the porch. They were not holding Bibles. They were holding hunting rifles, shotguns, buffalo guns. A dozen muzzles, all steady, all aimed at the disorganized militia. "Go on home, boys," Oakes said, his voice a low growl. "Your pay is paper. Ours is blood. This is not your fight." The militia looked at each other. They looked at Rooker, now being tied at the hands and feet by Isaiah, using a horse's reins. They looked at Crowell, who was standing, pistol empty, his face a mask of disbelief. One by one, the militiamen lowered their rifles. Their leader, a young sergeant, nodded curtly. "This is above our pay." He turned his horse. The rest followed, riding out of the yard, leaving their employers behind. Crowell was alone. He saw Rooker, tied. He saw the townsfolk, armed and angry. He saw Elowen, being helped to her feet by Wyatt and Calder. He saw his world, his power, his righteousness, dissolve into the dry dust of the yard. He did the only thing a coward can. He ran. He scrambled back to his carriage, shoved the driver aside, and lashed the horses. The carriage lurched, turning, and thundered out of the yard, back toward the arroyo, the only way out of the canyon. "He's getting away," June cried. Calder was already on his feet, running, not to the carriage, to Ashfall. He vaulted into the saddle, the horse already moving. "Isaiah!" he yelled. The old scout was already on his own horse, a mirror image, the two of them, the old and the new, the teacher and the student, galloped out of the yard, two hunters on a final chase. They ran, not side by side, but in parallel. Isaiah took the low road, following the carriage's dust. Calder, on Ashfall, took the high ridge, a shortcut, a move of pure animal instinct. They converged at the Arroyo del Lobo. Crowell, lashing the horses, was trying to take the narrow crossing too fast. The carriage wheel hit a rock, and the axle snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. The carriage slewed, throwing Crowell clear before it toppled into the shallow, muddy water. Crowell landed hard on the sandy bank. He scrambled to his feet, his fine black coat ripped, his face caked in mud. He was at the edge of the arroyo, a 20-foot drop to the rocks below. He turned. Calder was there, sitting on Ashfall, blocking his path. "It's over, Judge," Calder said. You devil!" Crowell screamed. He looked left. Isaiah was on the other side, blocking any escape. Crowell was trapped. He lunged, not at Calder, at the horse. He tried to grab Ashfall's bridle, to spook him. Ashfall, trained by a master, simply shied, stepping aside, but Crowell, his fine boots slick with mud, lost his footing. The soft, sandy edge of the arroyo, undercut by the last rain, gave way. He screamed, a thin, pathetic sound, as he slid, grasping at air, and fell over the edge. Calder was off his horse in a single, fluid motion. He dropped to his belly, his arm extended, and he caught him. He caught Crowell's wrist, one-handed, just as the man's full weight dropped. The strain was immense. Calder's muscles screamed. Crowell dangled, his eyes bulging, his feet kicking over the abyss. "Help me, pull me up, please." Calder's face was inches from his. He could see the terror in the judge's eyes. He could see the man who had stolen his life, who had given him a number, who had just tried to kill his mother. He had only to open his hand. He could let go. It would be gravity. It would be the land. It would be justice. "Please," Crowell wept, his other hand grabbing Calder's arm. Calder held him. He looked into the eyes of his monster, and he felt nothing, not hatred, not even pity, just resolve. "He will hang," Isaiah's voice said from above. The old scout was off his horse, his face grim. "Give me your hand," Calder said to Isaiah. Isaiah gripped his hand, and together they hauled the sputtering, weeping Abram Crowell up from the edge of the cliff. They threw him onto the sand. Crowell looked up at the boy, his son, his victim. Why? Calder looked down, his face calm. "My mother deserves justice," he said, his voice flat. "Not your revenge." A sound echoed down the canyon. It was not a gunshot. It was a bell. Reverend Harlan, back at his church, was ringing the bell, a signal to the whole valley. Riding hard up the main road was a new group of men. A man with a tin star, the sheriff of Kit Carson County, followed by a posse. The sheriff, a weary-looking man, slid from his horse. He had been summoned by Marta's telegraph an hour ago. He looked at the wreckage of the carriage. He looked at Crowell, covered in mud. He looked at Rooker, tied up back at the ranch. He looked at the ledgers Isaiah held. He looked at the testimony in Elowin's and Wyatt's eyes. He sighed, and he pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "Abram Crowell," the sheriff said, his voice tired. "You are under arrest, by the looks of this, for just about everything." The yard at Willow Draw, which had been a battlefield at sunrise, became a courthouse by noon. The sheriff, a man who believed in the slow, grinding work of the law, was meticulous. He took statements from Elowin, from Wyatt, from Isaiah. He had Marta Viteri countersign her own ledger as evidence. He had Reverend Harlan co-sign an affidavit of moral character. The old warrant for Elowin's arrest was torn in half, the sheriff's own hand nullifying Crowell's spite. The writ of seizure for the land was marked void, pending criminal investigation. And that, the sheriff assured them, was the most important part. "This ain't just about you, ma'am," he said, looking at Elowin, his hat in his hands. "With these ledgers," he nodded to Isaiah, "and your testimony, we're opening a full territorial investigation into the Society for Orphan Relief. We're going to find every child he numbered." The work of justice was, in the end, paperwork. When the sheriff and his posse had finally ridden out, taking the bound and silent Mac Rooker with them, an exhausted peace settled over the canyon. The townsfolk Oaks, Marta, the Reverend nodded. One by one, they were not friends, not quite. They were witnesses. They were a community, forged in a single morning of shared defiance. They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving the family alone. The yard was empty. It was just the four of them. June had gone inside, to make coffee, to give them space. Elowin turned. She looked at Calder, her son. He was standing by the porch, his rifle now leaning against the post, his face smudged with dirt. He looked exhausted and lost. She had been a mother for less than a day. 18 years ago, she had been a mother in name. in rage, in grief, for 18 years. Now, she was a mother, in fact, and she did not know what to do. She walked toward him. He did not move. He watched her, his eyes, her eyes, filled with a cautious, painful hope. She stopped in front of him. Her hand, the one that had held a knife, that had stacked wood, that had fired a gun, was shaking. She raised it. He did not flinch. He watched her. She touched his face. Her fingers, rough and calloused, traced the line of his jaw. He was real. He was warm. He was not a ghost. He was not a number. He was bone and skin and life. Her thumb brushed his cheek. "Rowan," she whispered, and the name was a prayer, a question, and an answer, all in one. A single tear, the first she had shed in true release, tracked down her own face. Calder's eyes, so long guarded, so long focused on a single point of vengeance, softened. He leaned his face into her hand. Just a fraction. He closed his eyes. The feeling of her touch was the memory from his infancy, the ghost in his blood, made real. He took her hand, the one on his face, and he didn't just hold it. He pulled it to his chest, placing her palm flat over his heart, just as she had done with Wyatt, what felt like a lifetime ago. "I am here," he said, his voice thick. "I was so afraid," she whispered. I thought Isaiah had raised you to do what I wanted to do, to kill." Calder opened his eyes. He looked at her, his gaze steady, and in it she saw the deep, profound, and gentle soul Isaiah had nurtured. "He did not raise me to kill. Mother," he said, the word a new, perfect, aching sound on his tongue. "He raised me to find you. That was all. To find you, and to come home." Wyatt had been standing by the porch, his heart too full for his chest. He had watched, his own eyes burning. He stepped forward now, and he did not put his hand on Elowen. He put it on Calder's shoulder. It was a man's grip, solid, heavy, an anchor. Calder looked up at him, at this man who had loved his mother, who had been the father he never knew. "That's right," Wyatt said, his voice a low rumble. "This is your home. There is always a place for you here, son." He used the word son, and it was not a word of blood. It was a word of choice. It was a word of labor, of mended fences, of shared burdens. It was the truest word of all. From the shadows of the barn, Isaiah Fort watched. His face, for a single, unguarded moment, was soft. The boy was safe. The woman was free. The promise he had made on the Llano Estacado, the promise he had kept for 18 years, was fulfilled. His war was over. He smiled, a small, tired, perfect smile. He turned and walked back into the barn to give the new family a moment to be born. That night, the cabin at Willow Draw was full. It was not a party, it was a supper. Luz Ortega had come, bringing a basket of fresh-baked cornbread. Reverend Harlan had returned, with a bottle of sacramental wine. "For medicinal purposes," he'd said, with a dry smile. Marta was there, and Oaks, and June. Wyatt played a guitar, an old, scarred thing. He played simple, quiet chords. And after a while, in the warm, lamp-lit room, Elowen began to hum. It was the lullaby, the Navajo song about the firstborn. But this time, when she came to the last note, the one she had never been able to sing, her voice did not break. She sang it, her voice clear and strong. And as the last note faded, Reverend Harlan, understanding, began to hum a simple, quiet hymn, Amazing Grace. The melodies, one of the holy people, one of the Christian God, one of a mother, one of a pastor, wove together in the small, warm room. Reverend Harlan raised his glass. "To love," he said, "and to labor, for in the end, they are the only two things that are real. Later, the guests were gone. The cabin was quiet. Calder and Isaiah were asleep. One in the loft, one in the barn. June was in her own small room. A soft rain had begun to fall, a gentle cleansing sound on the new roof. Elowen stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, breathing in the smell of the wet dust and the pine. The war was over. The rage was gone, and, in its place, she felt a profound, aching, terrifying quiet. She had lived her entire adult life with a single burning purpose, and now it was done. The door opened behind her. Wyatt stepped out. He did not speak. He just came and stood beside her. She turned and leaned her head against his chest. He was so solid. He was her anchor. He had been her anchor for 18 years, even when she did not know it. His arms came around her, pulling her close. It was not the desperate, seeking embrace of their first night. It was an embrace of arrival. It was a long, slow exhale. "It's over. Why?" she whispered into his shirt. I don't know who I am without the fight." He held her, rocking her gently. "I know who you are," he murmured, his lips against her hair. "You are Elowen. You are my wife. You are his mother. And you are home." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears of gratitude, her eyes clear in the moonlight. He bent his head and kissed her. It was a kiss that held no desperation, no sorrow. It was a kiss of thanks. It was a kiss of profound, quiet knowledge. His lips were warm. Hers were soft. His hand came up to cup her face, his calloused thumb wiping away a tear. Her hands, which had been clutching his shirt, came up to rest on his chest, to feel the slow, steady beat of his heart. They stood, locked in that simple, perfect embrace for a long, long time. As the rain fell around them, washing the world clean, it was the kiss of a man and a woman who had earned their peace, and who knew, at last, that they were safe. The next morning, Elowen woke to a new sound. Thwack! 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 She went to the window. Calder was in the yard, his shirt off, sweat glistening on his back. He was mending the corral post that had been splintered by the militia horse. He was using Wyatt's tools. Later, she saw him in the barn. He was cleaning it, putting it to rights. He took the bundle of Isaiah's old tools, the tracking knives, the wires, the spyglass, and he did not put them away. He hung them, with care, on a peg on the wall, next to Wyatt's harnesses. He was accepting both, the man who had raised him, and the man who had given him a home. Elowen watched him, and she knew what she had to do. She went to the porch, to the thick post where Crowell's bullet was still lodged. She took her own knife, the Green River knife Isaiah had given her so long ago, the knife that had been her hatred, and she began to carve. She carved for an hour, the wood peeling away, the letters deep and sure. When she was done, she stepped back. It was not a gravestone. It was a birth announcement. Rowan Calder at home. She set her knife down. She touched the wood, and then she touched the small, wooden deer Wyatt had carved, the one she had set on the rail, right next to the new name. That evening, the wind changed. It blew, not from the cold mountains, but from the south, from the Llano Estacado. It was a warm, soft wind, and it carried the smell of new rain, the old wounds, the ones on the land, the ones on their hearts, would never truly disappear. They would always be scars. But a scar is not a wound. It is a sign of healing. It is a sign that the worst is over. And at Willow Draw, under a roof built by love and labor, and the simple promise to keep each other safe, the healing had finally begun. Thank you for listening to this story. We would be honored if you would let us know where in the world you are listening from in the comments below, to share your thoughts and connect with this community. Please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video. And if you feel this story deserves to be heard, Press that hype button to help it reach more people.